The seventh commandment is about goods, about the goods of the world and their distribution and ownership of those goods, and how we respect persons and their property and the integrity of the created order. The church shows us in this commandment the basis for all of the very important social doctrine that involves the correct way of acting in the economy and the social and political life, our rights and our duties with respect to labor, justice and solidarity among nations, and our love for the poor. Now, the seventh commandment requires respect for the goods of others through the practice of justice and charity and of temperance and of solidarity. It especially requires that we respect our promises that we make and contracts that we agree to, and that we make reparation for any injustices that we've committed, that we pay people back if we've taken from them. It speaks to us about theft and the respect of the integrity of creation. This is about our stewardship. When the church speaks about the created order and talks about the environment, this is what she's talking about, the integrity of creation and the moderate use of the created world, things like the mineral wealth of a nation, or the produce that she grows in her fields, the animal resources, what the goods of the world. This is what the seventh commandment is about. Now, there is a right to private property, provided that property was acquired in a just way. So you don't have a right to property if you've stolen that property, so that's number one. But you also have to understand that the ownership of property always has an eye towards the destination of goods, as the church calls it, what those goods are intended for, and the satisfaction of the basic needs of others that takes precedence over the ownership of those goods. So the purpose of private property is a guarantee of a freedom and a dignity of the individual person. It helps you to meet your basic needs if you have a right to the things that you own. But it's also that right that allows us to have generosity and allows us to be charitable with our goods. You have to own the good to be able to give it away. So it's not charity to give away somebody else's goods. So if all goods are owned by the state, then that's destroyed charity, because you're not giving of yourself, you're giving of the stuff that belongs to the state. So private property is a very important part of individual freedom and the charitable life, which is perfection in the love of God that all of us are called to. Obviously, above all, the seventh commandment forbids theft, which is the taking or the using of somebody else's property against the will of the owner. You can do this also by paying an unjust wage. So a person has a right to be paid a just and living wage, and to not do that is a form of theft and a grave sin against the seventh commandment. When you hoard valuable goods, speculating on their future value and in order to gain advantage to the detriment of others, this is a grave sin against the seventh commandment. If you forge checks or invoices, this is a form of theft. What's also forbidden is evasion of taxes or fraud in your business, the willful damaging of private or public property, usury, corruption or the private abuse of common goods. This is all a form of theft. It's also important to remember that at work, if you deliberately do poor work or waste the goods of your employer, this is a form of theft and a sin against the seventh commandment. The social doctrine of the church is really a development of the truths of the gospel about the dignity of the human person in the social order, and it offers us principles and reflections about our judgments, about the norms and the guidelines for how we are to act in the social order. The church intervenes by making moral judgments about economic and social matters when the fundamental rights of the person, of the common good or the salvation of souls requires it. So this is the reason why you cannot exclude the church from the public square, because what the church addresses herself to is human dignity And human dignity is all wrapped up in how we do business, about how we protect one another, and about how we arrange society for the common good. And in the eyes of the church, this is ordered towards the salvation of souls. This is why the church must speak in the public square about social matters. It should be pursued according to the church's own proper methods within the sphere of the moral order, at the service of the whole human person and the community. The social and the economic life should have the human person as its author, as its center, and as its goal. Things that are opposed to the church's social doctrine are economic and social systems that sacrifice the rights of the person or make profit their exclusive norm or aim or ultimate end. This is the reason why the church rejects ideologies that are associated with communism or with atheistic and totalitarian forms of socialism. But in the practice of capitalism, the church also rejects self-centered individualism and this absolute primacy of the laws of the market over human labor. Work is both a duty and a right by which human beings collaborate with God, the Creator. The capacity to work is one of the ways in which we are made in the image and likeness of God. This is one of our dignities, is the capacity to work. So when you work with commitment, with competence, and when we fulfill our potential, which is inscribed in our nature, we honor the Creator who gives us these gifts and these talents. We provide for ourselves and for our families, and we serve the human community when we work, and this is a very good and noble thing. Furthermore, by the grace of God, work becomes a means of sanctification, of growing in holiness when you collaborate with Christ in doing your work. This is the grace of the present moment. This is why all human labor has dignity, because it becomes a means of your sanctification, and it is in support of your vocation to holiness, to work. Access to secure and honest employment must be open to everyone without discrimination and with respect to a free economic life, and to have within it fair compensation for your work. This is one of the roles of the state, is to guarantee the individual the freedom of private property, as well as stable currency, the efficient public services that support employment. It's also the state's responsibility to oversee and to direct the exercise of these rights in the economic sector. According to circumstances, society must help citizens to find work. Business managers have a responsibility for the economic and the ecological life in which their businesses operate. They have to consider the good of the people who are working for them, the good of the people in the wider community, and not just the profit that they're gaining by their business. Even though profits are necessary to assure their investments, to ensure the future of their business, it can't be the sole and most important element in their decision making. You have to carry out your work in a conscientious way. You have to be competent, you have to be dedicated, and you have to seek to resolve any controversies through dialogue. Recourse to a nonviolent strike is morally legitimate when it appears to be necessary in order to obtain benefit that is proportional and takes into account the common good. On the international level, all nations and all institutions have to carry out their work with a sense of solidarity for all of humanity, and the important sense of subsidiarity, which means solving problems at the most local possible level, because that's where true human justice is. As governments centralize the economy and centralize authority, it tends to rob the people of justice. And so this is what the church speaks about when addressing these social issues, when she says subsidiarity. If you can keep the decision-making at the most local possible level, and if you can keep control of the economy at the most local possible level, this gives us the greatest justice possible. It is also the method that's most likely to reduce poverty, to reduce inequality, and to promote the equal distribution of resources and the growth of the human potential in that community, with the least likelihood of exploiting people or the excess accumulation of debt by the poor, things that tend to impede the development of the less advanced countries that result from a highly centralized, dominating form of government. Now, the lay faithful take a part directly in the political and social life, with bringing their Christian spirit into the workplace and collaborating as an authentic witness of the gospel wherever they work and wherever they labor in the public square. And this brings with it peace and justice. And it's one of your obligations as a Christian to bring gospel life into your workplace. Love for the poor is inspired by the Beatitudes, by the example of Jesus and his constant concern for the poor. Jesus says to us, "Whatever you have done to the least of my brethren, you have done to me." So our love for the poor is ultimately love of the Lord. This is the definition of charity. The gospel virtue of charity is what? It's perfection in the love of God. So when you show love for the poor, Jesus tells you it's showing love for him. Love for the poor shows itself through the struggle that we participate in, the struggle against poverty, material poverty, but also against the forms of cultural, moral, and religious poverty. Spiritual and corporal works of mercy is what the church calls these. And there are many charitable institutions that have formed throughout the centuries that are a concrete witness to what the church calls the preferential love or the preferential option for the poor, which characterizes us as disciples of Christ.